Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, February 19th, 2019. That's two 19s, and you know what that means. You gotta go play the lottery if you even play when it has a 19 in it. I don't know. Anyway, time for yet another show. Things slightly disrupted here at World Headquarters in the morning. It's a little chilly. There's a snowstorm on the way. We probably won't see it until the overnight hours. No idea what that's going to do to the Wednesday show. We will see. I am not sure. It's a national emergency, something. Plus, one of the kids had a class that required him to be dressed in business attire today, and that meant, of course, me making sure that he was in that business attire, and it meant basically putting it on him, scrambling around, finding shoes, all of that stuff, and then, of course, becoming so late that they needed a ride to school. So, okay, well, you know, it was a hell of a day. Anyway, we are underway. We are expecting snow tomorrow. Shouldn't affect things here unless it knocks down, I don't know, all the power grid and makes it impossible for us to broadcast, but I think everything should be fine. We're not expecting Armageddon at this point. Although, I guess technically, we've got an Armageddon on our hands. I got a notice today. One of those annoying security alerts from a website that says, oh, yeah, we've had a security breach, et cetera, please change your password. But I only saw it 5 minutes before air. So you got 2 hours, I guess, to hack that before I get a chance. Or maybe during one of the commercials, maybe we'll say 27 minutes or so. And then I can break away and try and change my password so that you can't break in and use this service that I haven't used since about 2014, according to my emails. Anyway, I guess the better thing to do is to go in there and delete my account, but who knows? That's probably harder to do than changing the password. So maybe I'll just go with that. I wonder how many, there must be 1 million defunct sites out there for which I still have active passwords, and maybe they're not all defunct. I don't know. Eventually, Skynet will use this to kill us all, I am sure. So maybe I shouldn't worry about it one way or the other. They'll get me one way or another. All right, time to round up the stories of the morning. It is Tuesday, and so we are without Greg Dworkin this morning, but we do have a morning tweet from Bill, so this will give us some idea of what we're going to do for the day. Maybe, I don't know. Daily Co's Radio is live now for National Emergency Tuesday, and it is our first National Emergency Tuesday. Keep that in mind. Please, we'll start counting them from now on. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Hi. Offers tips on how to lay underwater netting to stop submarine caravans from reaching our precious coastlines. That's next up, by the way, of course. They're going to have to figure out how to extend the wall far enough out into the Pacific Ocean and I suppose the Gulf of Mexico. And at that point, why not just keep going and build all the way around the perimeter of the continental United States? No idea, how we're going to prevent people from just going around the side of it. As the president has fretted several times that all you have to do is make a right turn. It's usually a right, and they go off into the desert and then make a left. Sometimes though they make a left and then they go and then they make a right, and that's how you go around a thing, I guess. I think that's what he's trying to describe. And I guess in his mind, the idea of one unitary wall that goes all the way across would stop everybody, except it's impossible to build one. And, parts of the wall are going to be breached and parts of the wall are impossible to build, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to fill you in on this, but that's where we are with this guy. And Bill reminds me, eventually, I always wondered about that, watching Game of Thrones. Doesn't anybody just go to the shoreline and hop around? You just go into the water. How far out into the water do they build it? There's a wall made out of ice. Can it work? I don't know. They had dragons and magic, so I don't really know how much I can figure out about that. Let's see. Catching up on other items. Falling by. Oh, look at that. I didn't think government executive would go with this as a headline. Just happened to see this one go by on Twitter. Government executive publishing the story. Play of the day, declaring an emergency and heading to the omelet bar, which, is old news for us, we're old hands at the old omelet bar thing here. But, I do find that odd that Government Executive magazine, I guess, would have gone with that. I thought they were more serious and stuffy and level-headed, but I guess not. Good job. I'm glad. I'm proud of you. All right. I guess the big news of the morning, according to the headline writers, is that Bernie Sanders has announced that he's running for president. I mean, I think everybody knew Bernie Sanders was running for president, but you get to have that headline on the day you announce, I am running for president. And then, so that's what's happening today. I'm not shocked by it. You're not shocked by it. You might be excited by it. I'm not particularly excited by it, I guess. I like Bernie Sanders just fine. I think I prefer him as a senator. If he was president, I guess I'd be okay with that. I'm pleased with that. And of course, if he's a Democratic nominee against Donald Trump, I don't think there's any question about what I would do about that. I'd vote for Bernie Sanders. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it's possible that in the shakeout of things, that by the time the primaries come around to Virginia, the choices are such that I find myself saying, all right, I'll vote to nominate Bernie Sanders. I don't know if he lasts as long this time. He was in a pretty unique position last time. It was a pretty small field. Lots of people have done the things you do in politics, i.e. take the best parts of a previous popular campaign and make them part of your own campaign and try and steal that thunder. And it's okay because it's socialist thunder and everybody gets to have a piece of it, I guess. I don't know. And whatever. All right, so we'll see what kind of numbers he can put up in terms of support. There are some diehards out there. And some people who have moved on, having enjoyed Bernie's campaign or been excited about it, or just not having been all that excited about, let's say, about Hillary Clinton. I don't know what people's motivation was, but it looks to me like there's less of a clamor because a lot of his space has been occupied. Now, he has a lot to do with that. And a lot of the people who are running on parts of what was his platform or developed from his platform, probably, I don't know. Some of them will acknowledge it and some of them won't. And we'll see whether he holds his old coalition together or not, or whether anybody poaches that coalition enough that, we'll see. I guess like in a year from now, we'll figure out whether it made any difference. This is what I hate about our election system. We're just doing this for just too long, just on, and it goes on forever. All right, let's see. Armando is in trouble, as it turns out. I just happened to see this one on the top of the recommended list. Is this the public face of Daily Kos? And the question is about Armando. So now it's let's get Armando fired at his non-paying job as contributing editor at Daily Kos. I think it's non-paying. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe anyway, that's the deal. So Subir is angry about that this morning. I usually find that whatever to be quite honest, usually whatever's motivating Subir to outrage is not of interest to me, typically speaking. Occasionally we're on the same page. Usually he's outraged about something that, we've been aware of for umpteen years. And, this is the way things like that work on Capitol Hill. And as upsetting as it is, there's actually an easy solution to it. You just have to know it. But that's not always what he's up to. So let's see. However, this one involves an Armando tweet, which, as you know, is a permanent fixture in the outward-facing edifice, the outward-facing facade to the edifice of Daily Kos. It's all built around Armando tweeting the F word. So this is it. He's complaining about it. This is a contributing editor to Daily Kos who has tweeted, I'm going to F Bernie, though. So I don't know what you have in mind, Armando, but you're in trouble because Subir has seen it, and he's angry that you're listed on the masthead and that you might have different ideas or be angry about something that isn't angering him. And I guess, I don't know whether he has cornered the market on what to be angry about here at Daily Kos, or just thinks that, I don't know. This happens all the time. I mean, it might as well be for these purposes, in terms of like trying to single out a Daily Kos editor over a tweet and, showing a screenshot of it, and a screenshot of him being on the masthead is an old play. It's usually a right-wing play, and I don't know. Well, we'll see. He's full of outrage about this. He wants to ask the community to ask itself this: would we tolerate this kind of rhetoric on this site? Yeah. I think we tolerate it. Anyway, should we tolerate this kind of rhetoric among their editors and front page authors? Probably. I mean, after all, if you want the mother of all controversies with respect to that sort of thing, there's always Marcos and the Mercenaries comment. But Subir probably doesn't like mercenaries, so it's all right, I guess, and does like Bernie, and that's bad. So, all right, well, that's the way it goes with it. Well, I don't think we actually need to, although, look, there's a funny typo. I see a screen grab of Armando's tweet of February 4th. I think that he meant to say the Bernie bros will be the death of Bernie, and everybody remembers that whole controversy about Bernie bros or whatever, but it says here that, he does note the typo, but he thinks it might not be a typo. Subir thinks there might be a secret plot here. Bernie Bros came out as Bernie Briss, which I think is over. They finished the Bernie Briss some number of years ago. But Subir helpfully points out that Briss is the Hebrew word. Brit is the Hebrew word. Briss is the, a strange, it's an Ashkenazic pronunciation of Brit. But okay, Briss is the Hebrew word for circumcision, and it might not be a typo. The editor in question, and that's Armando, has a habit that makes me want to press this button. Maybe not. Okay, a habit of taking the term Bernie Bros. Oh, do you have this habit, Armando? This I would ask you in a sit-down interview. Do you have a habit of taking the term Bernie Bros and changing it slightly in an effort to appear clever? Let's see. There's another tweet here captured that says, that's why as much as Bernie Joes, as in journos, I guess that's the Bernie Bros who are journalists, want 2016 to be glossed over of Bernie. It doesn't matter what the contents of the tweet is. That's the habit. There's one tweet here where he said Briss instead of Bros, and I and O, of course, right next to one another on the QWERTY keyboard. And then there's the joke that he explains parenthetically, Bernie Joes, in this one. And I think that might be the end of the misspellings of Bernie Bros. So that's it for the habit. And how interesting. I wonder if that will catch fire. Bris being a Hebrew word for circumcision, and Bernie being Jewish, this is an anti-Semitic attack, and you must be purged. I think it's obvious at this point. All right. So, okay. This typo is going to do you in. All right. Well, I'm sure you're busy defending yourself somewhere else. But if you're not, and you wanted to continue on this topic or any other, for instance, Elliot Abrams. I know a lot of people were anxious to get back to Elliot Abrams, but I could see today may be an emergency circumstance, and you're unable to continue. You can't go on. I understand. All right. Well, that's it's what it is. I don't think I could do it any more justice certainly by reading it or responding to any of it. This is just one of the things that upsets Subir today, and he's made quite a reputation for himself over the last couple of years, being upset about things like that. And, that's the way it goes on Daily Kos. And a lot of times people actually, ride that straight into a contributing editorship for themselves as well. And that's always fun and interesting. And then they usually get to know the person personally if they meet at, say, Netroots Nation or anything like that. And very rarely is there blood or violence of any kind. And people come together in the end. And, if that can happen, terrific. If not, I don't think we're going to lose that much by this. The other thing that is also a not quite annual, but it's pretty close to it. Maybe we'll say biennial, or maybe every 4 years because of the presidential primaries. Pretty common ritual at Daily Kos to have bloodletting like this, and then have a group storm off in a huff, insistent that they are going to either start their own blog or they're going to boycott this one. And as usually happens, because this is happening all the time, totally independent of the tiffs and splits, the split will come accompanied with a prediction of the imminent doom of Daily Kos, and readership will only continue to increase. But that's generally speaking because the usage of the internet continues to increase, and we cover current events, and people are interested in using the internet to find out about current events, and it's just on a growth trajectory. And during an election year or the run-up to an election year, the growth is usually greatest. So our splits tend to come at that moment when the growth is naturally greatest, and so far in, let's say half a dozen bloodlettings, splits, boycotts, etc., I don't believe I've ever seen it fail to come to fruition. That is, the predictions of the imminent or long-term doom of Daily Kos. So I'm not too worried about that one, I guess. I find it interesting. As patterns repeat themselves, it's always worth noting, and a good split and bloodletting and boycott will be informed by the history of prior splits, bloodlettings, and boycotts. And you might, maybe you save yourself a lot of aggravation, or maybe you just do the split and boycott but with no expectations, and then you'll come away less frustrated. Okay, so that's the home news for the day. Anybody else commenting on this one? Let's see. Michael Musson says he's figured out a solution. Install a wall the wall stuff. The wall simulator. Yeah. Okay. That was a good solution. We were talking about the golf simulator. Did we ever discuss that on the air? That he had installed a golf simulator at the White House? Have you ever seen one of these things? Yes, that's right. We were talking about, I think that they have them at Dick's Sporting Goods near me. Okay, so we should have, that would have been a great idea. $50,000 would have been a great investment for a wall simulator at the White House. People also thought about installing presidential simulators of some kind that made it look like you had a cabinet meeting going on, or that people were offering you emoluments, perhaps, something like you could choose different things, like the holodeck on the new Star Trek shows. You could always do something like that. Wall simulator in the White House. The bonus would be it already has wall simulators in every room. That's true. Usually 4 of them. I don't know how you would count how many wall simulators there are in the Oval Office, but that's up to the mathematicians among you. You could tell us a little bit about that. All right, let's see. Anything else happening by way of commentary on the morning's fallout? No? Okay, excellent. Moving on then. Let's see. We have, we'll go to Pocket and pick out a couple of other fun stories. Another hot item moving on the wires. You'll never believe it. Mitch McConnell and his wife, Elaine Chao, Secretary of Transportation, might be corrupt. I bet you hadn't thought about that possibility. Politico publishes a story today written by Tanya Snyder and titled Emails Can you believe it? There are emails involved. Emails reveal coordination between Chow, McConnell offices. That is to say, Chow's office and McConnell's office coordinated an email. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong up front with their having traded emails. They are, of course, married. And being majority leader of the Senate, you are naturally going to have some business occasionally with the Transportation Department. That's to be expected as well. But I see that they think they're onto something else here. And it wouldn't surprise me. Let's find out a little bit about it. I think Politico is the only one discussing it at the moment. By mid-afternoon, there should be other coverage of it as well. We'll see whether they have turned up anything new. Maybe as we discuss that tomorrow, if it stays a hot news item. But for now, a trove of more than 800 pages of emails, that's not a lot when it comes to emails, sheds new light on the working relationship between Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. One of the most potent, in the political sense, I'm sure, power couples in Washington, including their dealings with McConnell supporters from their home state of Kentucky. Chao has met at least 10 times with politicians and business leaders, not so bad so far, from the state, Kentucky, in response to requests from McConnell's office, according to documents provided to Politico by the watchdog group American Oversight. In some cases, those people later received what they were hoping for from Chao's department. This is not super solid, to be honest, including infrastructure grants, the designation of an interstate highway, and assistance in getting state funds for a highway project, although the documents don't indicate the meetings led to those outcomes. And I think those two know how to cheat in ways that help not disguise their corruption per se, but prevent them from being prosecuted on the question of corruption. And, well, let's see. We'll move on. One paragraph doesn't make the whole story, but it's not sounding super solid so far. The records also do not show how frequently Chao has met with people from outside Kentucky. They state her husband is represented in the Senate since 1985, or how readily she has responded to similar requests from other lawmakers. So we have no comparison here. But at least a dozen of the emails show McConnell's staff acting as a conduit between Chao and Kentucky political figures or business leaders, some of whom have had prior relationships with the couple. Now, I mean, I guess if they're married, I don't know how much time she has spent there, but technically Kentucky is her home state too, and if the Secretary of Transportation was Joe Smith from Kentucky, you would expect that a lot of Kentuckians might call on him and say, hey, as a fellow Kentuckian, I hope you can see the value of this program in Kentucky, and can't we have some money for it? It's just, that's kind of the way business works. I guess we'll see whether they uncover anything more unseemly as we go on. In one email from February 2nd, 2017, just days after Chao was sworn in, McConnell's state director emailed a Chao lieutenant, asking the secretary to meet with maritime industry lobbyist Jim Adams about proposed changes to Buy American, Hire American requirements for offshore drilling equipment. The lobbyist and his wife, a Kentucky state senator who used to work for McConnell, donated $1,500 to McConnell's 2014 re-election campaign, according to FEC filings. You know, quite honestly, this is a thin broth so far. The secretary knows them both well. McConnell State Director Terry Carmack wrote Todd Inman, who at the time was Director of Operations at the Department of Transportation. Chao met with the lobbyist the following month, according to her calendar. Carmack also requested a meeting in April of 2017 for Greg Delancey, the general manager of Taylor Motors in Murray, Kentucky, a government contractor that provides bus services primarily to the Defense Department. Carmack wrote that Delancey was, quote, the Callaway County GOP chairman and about to be the first district GOP chair. Chao met with someone from Taylor Motors in July of 2017. when the McConnell staffer asked Inman to arrange a meeting for Jason Vincent and other people from the Pennyroyal, I'm guessing on the pronunciation, Area Development District during a March 2017 fly-in. He noted that some of the representatives were friends. American Oversight obtained the emails under the Freedom of Information Act. The group's executive director and founder, Austin Evers, said they show an unusually close relationship between a Senate leader and a member of President Donald Trump's cabinet, and that Secretary Chow built a political operation in her office to favor Kentucky. Yeah, kind of barely. I don't know. To be quite honest, like I said, this is a thin broth, or some people say thin gruel. And I don't know. I'm not going to grind the rest of the way through this article, to be honest. It was a promising headline, and I'm sure a lot of work went into it. And I'm sure that the people who did the research and dug this up are tearing their hair out that they're not getting more of a reaction. Well, if they were listening, they'd be tearing their hair out about not getting more of a reaction out of me for this story. But I don't know. You're going to have better specifics and a clearer illustration of an open and shut quid pro quo for your case to get me excited about this thing anyway. But it's out there, and we'll see whether it develops. I thought we'd at least put it on the radar. And these sorts of things very often have a way of snowballing. And once the story is broken, other people say, yeah, I had an experience in dealing with Chow's office because for instance, we've clashed with Mitch McConnell over something, and a routine meeting that we should have been entitled to as players in the transportation sector with the Secretary of Transportation has taken forever to get, or we've been refused it entirely. And then you would begin to establish that sort of pattern. Maybe there's more of that in that story, but they're going to have to work to extract that and bring it to the top before this gets hot. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Brief note to bring you up to date on this major story. Payless Shoes, Payless.com now, because they're online and everything is awesome. Payless Shoes files for bankruptcy and will close all 2,500 North American stores, presumably including the, shall we say, infamous? It wasn't really infamous. I liked it. I thought it was a great idea. Famous pop-up store that they did in the malls in the Los Angeles area, was it? Remember I think I read you a story about it. Paylessy, remember? They did something like that. They dressed up Payless shoes as fancy Italian import shoes and charged way more than they usually charge for the exact same shoes, dressed up the store to look like a super upscale boutique. I thought it was a fantastic idea, although, it obviously didn't save them from bankruptcy, and it maybe is the only sort of, is the sort of thing you would only try when you're teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. I don't know. I'd like to know who approved that. If they knew bankruptcy was looming, who knows? Last ditch effort. It wasn't like they were going to really transition into Paylessy either, but okay. A sad chapter in, I don't know, the lives of those of you who like shoe shopping, I guess. I don't. So I guess it's all on you to carry the burden of sorrow over the death of Payless shoes. But in all likelihood, you'll get over it pretty quickly. And I wonder if they attribute how much of their death they attribute to online retailing of shoes. I mean, they changed to Payless.com, but that didn't save them, and people went with the other startups instead. I don't know. Well, Donald Trump making America great again. What can you do? All right, let's see. Other things flying by this morning. I remembered yesterday's story and had to comment again on the woman from Long Island, Beth Kalori, who was so shocked that she almost fell out of her chair because her taxes went up. And it sort of hit me that, she's from Long Island. I'm astonished. I don't know if she's lived there her whole life, but I'm astonished that there would be someone from the greater New York City area, New York media market, that didn't know, that couldn't predict that Donald Trump was going to be all about finding a way to take her money and make it his. I mean, that's always what he's been doing. He was just terrible at it because he was a private businessman in a relatively small sector, a small section of a small sector, really, honestly. He just wasn't in any mass markets that enabled him to rob lots of money from lots of people. A very specific sector of the economy he was able to drain. But once he got his hands on the whole thing, the difficulty level of predicting that he was going to be working, to the extent he works on anything, toward taking money from as many people as he could and giving as much of it as he could to himself was, it's like that's what the guy does or tries to do all the time. And I don't know, I guess on Long Island, you don't have that much necessarily to do with Donald Trump. But, if you were a kid in the 80s, maybe you didn't pay any attention and your only exposure to Donald Trump, unless you were in the Miss Teen Universe pageant, your only exposure to Donald Trump is through The Apprentice. And as we know, they worked extremely hard to make it look like he was a serious businessman who knew what he was doing and made money on that show, and it fooled a lot of people. All right. Michael Musson reminding us now that this is a good point. Thousands of Payless shoe stores will now be available at unbelievable discounts. It's a good point. I would like to pay less for this shoe store, and now the opportunity finally presents itself. Okay. That's true. That's a good point. And you should, if you like shoe store shopping any better than you like shoe shopping, then you're in luck. Let's see. Another topic of much discussion today, although I didn't put any stories about it aside, and I suppose I should look around for them. Amy Klobuchar continues to deal with the fallout of stories of her maltreatment of staff. I must admit I haven't looked very deeply into what those stories are, and I don't know, therefore, how different they are from routine stories of maltreatment of staff on Capitol Hill. There are an awful lot of those, but by most accounts, hers rises above and beyond the typical abuse. And it should be noted, for the record, that it actually is typical of Capitol Hill offices to abuse staff by most definitions of abuse. They're put to work on a disturbing range of personal errands very often by members of Congress. But I guess this rises above and beyond, and people really had some serious complaints about these things. So I'm willing to honor those complaints. That's not what is in the news about her this morning, however. The news this morning is, I guess she had a write-up, and this is the one I have to try and find. I didn't pay much attention to it. It didn't really look like a super exciting story. What was setting her apart was giving her her own space, or what they were trying to define as her own space, in a crowded presidential field, was her willingness, as Paul Tsongas, remember him, used to say, that she wasn't going to be Santa Claus, essentially. She wasn't quoting him or using that line or anything. The description was that she was the one willing to say no. In other words, She was the one willing to say in a Democratic primary that she was not in favor necessarily of expanding Medicare into Medicare for all, that she wasn't necessarily in favor of enlarging every social program that she could find, or even, I don't know, maybe none of them. I guess she thought that this was going to make her the moderate in the race, and I don't know. I guess that's still a place that you can occupy among the declared candidates. It's true. It's just not really where early adopters, I don't think, are in the Democratic primary. I think people who want to sign on with campaigns this early in the process are a little bit more excited, usually, by bold proposals and the willingness to say yes to things rather than no. Seems like a less than effective sort of launch theme, as opposed to the yes we can, no we probably can't, and maybe we shouldn't until the rest of America comes around to work. I don't know. So it seems like a pretty wishy-washy way to start, or outright, defeatist way to start. But I suppose, it's not entirely impossible that you could recruit an army of defeatists from among Democratic Party primary participants. There are several of us. So you might find a way to rally us to that cause. I don't know. It's not working for me so far, but okay. Anyway, quite honestly, I will say I've been, to be entirely honest about it, I've been distancing myself from the primary forever. I've never enjoyed the presidential primaries, and I don't, I primarily don't like what happens when you decide, you say something as timid as, I think I might like that person's position, and then of course you find yourself in arguments about whatever it is, whatever the negatives of that particular candidate. The people who are for other candidates are in a big hurry to point out those things to you, to try to logic you out of the very important premise that you kind of liked something that person said. So, that's, why I dislike the primaries, and probably any among the rest of you who also feels the same way. It's probably the same driver. I've enjoyed catching up on the television appearances made by, is it South Bend's mayor, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete, and I've seen the name pronounced or written out and pronounced two slightly different ways. One, I think the official declaration, maybe even from the campaign, was that it was Boot Edge. But I have also heard, I saw no less an authority than Mika Brzezinski, whose name is not that easy to pronounce from writing herself, said Buddha Judge is kind of how it came out. And that's actually, it seems easier to say to me, Buddha Judge than Boot Edge. But I don't know if it's right. But anyway, I saw him appear on I guess it was on Morning Joe. Don't think I turned on the television to watch Morning Joe. It was just the clip was circulating on Twitter. And I thought he did a nice job. It was credible in terms of dodging what needed to be dodged and giving answers, probably prepackaged, that needed to be given at the appropriate times, or hammering the square peg into the round hole when necessary. It went well. And, what can I tell you? I don't really want to field complaints that this is, how could you, with so many qualified women in the race, opt for a white man as your leading candidate? To which I say, I don't know. I just did. And I didn't say, I don't know. I don't have a leading candidate. You guys are going to sort this out for me. By the time I get a chance as a Virginia voter to cast a ballot, most of the participants in the primary will be gone, and we'll be much more focused. And quite honestly, if I vote for the wrong person and they don't get nominated, you know what I'm going to do anyway. So it doesn't make much of a difference. Doesn't make me think any less of the qualified women or other qualified men in the race because I thought, hey, that guy did okay on Morning Joe. That's not how it's going to work for me. But okay, I thought that was interesting. And it would be, it's a long shot. It would be very interesting, I think, to see if he can survive the first couple of primaries and continue on late into the contest, coming from the position of mayor of a, not the biggest town in the world, but it's no small affair, South Bend. So anyway, that's out there. No, don't at me, as the kids say on Twitter, I guess, or you can, but make it fun. Let's see. Another fun story coming across the transom at the moment, before I get to other things I've socked away with a real plan. Roger Stone is an idiot. He's really asking for it. The Hill has this summary of what went on over the last day or so with Roger Stone. He has shared and quickly deleted Instagram photos of the federal judge on his case, former Trump campaign informal advisor, they call him in this piece here, if I get all these pop-ups out of the way. Roger Stone on Monday posted a picture of on Instagram of U.S. District Judge Amy Berman Jackson, the federal judge overseeing his criminal case, with what appeared to be small crosshairs next to her head. I did see that. It didn't look to me in a glance like something he had photoshopped together. It looked like like she might have been standing. I don't know whether she was standing next to something that had that. What would she be standing near? And I guess it had to have been photoshopped together. But I mean, you could have done a much better job of targeting her if that's what you were doing, by photoshopping the cross. As people who are crazy and want to incite violence online, they typically will photoshop the crosshairs over the face or body of the person they're targeting. And the appearance of a little crosshairs up in the corner behind her head seems like, I don't know what to make of that. Except if you put it there on purpose, then there's very little I can do to explain it away. If it's not, then I don't know. Anyway, that's what he did, and then he posted this thing on his Instagram account. It was quickly deleted, and later he apologized to the court. How do you like that? But I guess his original post was, through legal trickery, deep state hitman Robert Mueller has guaranteed that my upcoming show trial is before Judge Amy Berman Jackson. He didn't have to do anything in order to do that. His is a case that's related to the rest of what Mueller is doing, and therefore is before Judge Amy Berman Jackson. And it makes all the sense in the world that the same judge, when the cases are brought in the same jurisdiction, if they are connected, will sit for all of them. But, of course, he goes on to say, well, she's an Obama-appointed judge who dismissed the Benghazi charges against Hillary Clinton and incarcerated Paul Manafort prior to his conviction for any crime, because, of course, he was violating the terms of his release. But hey, whatever. Hashtag fix is in. Help me fight for my life at stonedefensefund.com, the post read. So soliciting some donations for his legal defense. And, of course, I did see Empty Wheel pointing out that we've flip-flopped from Roger Stone did nothing wrong to help me fight for my life with donations. But being on trial in federal court will do that, I guess. So that was interesting. We'll see whether that develops into anything serious or not. But, he may be digging a grave for himself here. And that doesn't bother me. I'm okay with his doing that. I mean, it's not the right thing to be doing with your life, but if it ends up burying him, I won't be sad. That's what I mean. All right. Let's see. Other stories worth noting. I have two. Count them. There you go. You did it. Two. Stories queued up here from recent front page posts at Daily Kos. No real good segue between them, but why don't we say, since we were just talking about a judge, we can go to this story about judges in general. Kelly Macias wrote this one for the site and the headline says, well, maybe it says it all, but I'll say a little bit more of what she had to say after the headline. In a single year, and I guess it was last one, Trump has had 10 judicial nominees who don't agree with school desegregation. I think that's probably a record, certainly for a single year. But yeah, it's a good point. We're noting this weird trend of judicial nominees under the Trump administration who dodge or outright answer wrong the question, which was traditionally a softball question of, what do you think of Brown v. Board of Education? I mean, I don't think anybody ever really put that question to judges that way until now, because it was always assumed you'd have to be an idiot. You would have to want to have your nomination rejected to say anything other than awesome decision, perfect, beautiful. But it actually, I think, began coming up in a slightly different context. I mean, with a slightly different prompt. I think that people, also meaning for it to be a softball, have begun they ask, what famous cases from the Supreme Court, what famous precedents do you have any disagreements with? Or, however they ask the question. But they're asking, tell me something about the places where you would deviate from what would be now considered to be the mainstream view of Supreme Court jurisprudence. And sometimes, of late, conservatives have been emboldened to begin saying, well, I find fault with the decisions and Brown v. Board of Education is one of them, although I don't know how you comfortably end up justifying that criticism. But I think somebody was, I don't know who was first out of the box with that answer, but it has convinced a number of others. It's almost like it's a signal. It actually make more sense as a signal, like for Federalist Society judges to let everyone know that you're with, let Republicans know, wink, wink, I'm one of you. You take this otherwise completely crazy position of saying, yeah, I disagree strongly with, one of the bedrock decisions of the civil rights movement. And that's supposed to be the signal to you. Only a crazy, over the top, ultra conservative, reactionary Republican would say something like that. And since he's going to spend the rest of the time saying balls and strikes, this is the signal to us that he's one of us. And if he answers the question, they know that the protocol, there's a lot to squeeze into this. They know that they're nominating Republican judges for the purpose, essentially, of targeting abortion laws in the country. But they also know that it's been a third rail thing, and it cuts too close to the bone, and you might have more equivocating from Susan Collins if you outright say, oh yeah, I'm here to outlaw abortion. She'll usually come around in the end and vote for you anyway. But there was a time, and I think the strategy developed in a time wherein it was still possible to get Susan Collins to vote against you if you were as a nominee saying, I'm outright opposed to abortion and I'm here to do whatever I need to do to stop it. The law be damned. That's what they wanted to hear. So like the ticket to the hearts of the rest of her Republican colleagues, the sign that you really were also going to do your best to eliminate abortion rights without saying so and worrying Susan Collins and or Lisa Murkowski, or in the old days, Olympia Snow, whatever. The play is to say, well, I'll just be crazy on Brown v. Board of Education instead, because I guess at the time that they developed the play, there aren't a whole lot of black senators, and there still aren't a whole lot of black senators. And so that's a safe lunacy. And now, of course, you trade equivocating from Susan Collins for Tim Scott's annoyance with you, and he sinks as many nominations as people used to think Susan Collins would. So I don't know. Maybe on balance, it isn't such a great play. Maybe you should just say that's actually not a bad law at all. Anyway, let me read what Kelly has to say on it, because, you know, she's actually had some organized thoughts on it. Why not give her the time? The presidency of Donald Trump has not been a successful one for him, except for the obscene amount of havoc and pain he has inflicted upon the most vulnerable people in our society. As part of his reign of terror, Trump has appointed a record number of conservative federal judges, many of whom hold absolutely frightening views on race, religion, and reproductive justice. In fact, their retrograde views seem to be a necessary qualification for becoming a judicial nominee under this administration. That is true. As an example, Brown v. Board of Education, the 1954 Supreme Court decision that ended school segregation, has been universally supported in the legal community. It is considered to be beyond debate. Yet Trump has put forth at least 10 judicial nominees in the past year who refuse to offer an opinion on Brown. As Mother Jones reports earlier this month, Trump's nominee to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, Naomi Rao, appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee. She is positioned to take a seat left vacant by Brett Kavanaugh when he was confirmed to the Supreme Court. In her hearing, Rao refused to answer whether she thought Brown was correctly decided. Why? I don't know. It's just a signal, I guess. I mean, and here is a clip that basically says that. I mean, okay, it doesn't really add that much, but you just, you know, by way of proof, here it is. Richard Blumenthal asked the question whether the court had made the right decision in Brown. Rao replied, as a judicial nominee, I think it's not appropriate for me to comment on the correctness of particular precedents. In some cases that might be true, but this is such settled stuff that, you know, I mean, you say, yeah, it's correctly decided. Yeah, I mean, you can, by the way, you can say it was correctly decided, but I disagree with it, you know, over different grounds, but they didn't address those grounds. And although I would have made my objection on those grounds, I wouldn't be surprised if I was outvoted, but okay. But generally speaking, yeah, if you're going to say it's incorrectly decided, you think that the majority should have, by rights, voted this. So it's not an easy thing to do, to say, I don't think it was correctly decided, but I'm okay with it. But it is a possible position. But I don't know. Also, who cares? I mean, these guys know that they're going to have to do a little bit of fudging or maybe even some outright lying in order to make it to the bench, and they're not above it, so they might as well just say, sure, Brown was correctly decided, and then, I mean, then what? I mean, a question like that, quite honestly, Blumenthal, maybe by the time he asked it of Rao, was like, well, now this is a necessary question I have to ask of every nominee because they're all crazy. But at the outset, the first couple people they ever asked this, I assume they thought they were asking the easiest question in the world. And I don't know when it first became a question to just ask them outright, was Brown correctly decided? But it must have happened after a couple of these sorts of flubs. Like, what cases do you think had major errors and somebody spat out Brown and survived? Anyway, Kelly continues, when pressed for a yes or no answer, Rao only replied that the case was, quote, an incredibly important decision of the Supreme Court, which, of course, my kids learned in civics or AP U.S. government. It's like, here's a list of incredibly important Supreme Court decisions. Brown v. Board of Education is on it. That doesn't make them a lawyer or qualified to be a judge. They just remember being in class. Well, anyway, it continues. You cannot make this stuff up, although I'm making a lot of it up, to be honest. Donald Trump's nominees to the federal bench actually refused to acknowledge school desegregation as a good thing. This would almost seem unbelievable in 2019, but it is exactly what we've come to expect from this administration. It is also completely frightening, especially given that several of those people have already been approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee and will go on to receive a vote in the Senate. Judicial nominees refusing to endorse Brown is unprecedented and pretty much unheard of. And this goes well beyond political party. Neither George W. Bush's nor Barack Obama's Supreme Court nominees had any trouble agreeing that this case represented progress in American society and was properly decided. Once again, we are in an era of complete madness, where everything we know to be sensible and just is becoming completely undone by the madman in the White House and his friends. There's another pull quote here. Rao's refusal to acknowledge that Brown was rightly decided is a serious flouting of democratic norms and a judicial dog whistle, says Todd A. Cox, the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund Policy Director, signaling that Brown, its legacy, and all the progress flowing from it are potentially up for renegotiation. And Kelly concludes here, remember when Hillary Clinton warned us that Donald Trump represented a grave danger to this country? She's been proven right time and time again. It's been said that one person alone, even if they are the president, can't destroy our democracy thanks to our government's system of checks and balances. But what about one person, his incredibly cruel and racist staff, his administration, and his entire political party? Well, what happens then? Donald Trump and the Republicans are absolutely hell-bent, she says, on destroying every bit of progress toward equality that we've made over the last 6 decades. It's not only a disgrace, it's also a huge disaster and poses an enormous threat to all of us. And I think that is largely true. However, I will point out that it's still true that one person probably isn't able to destroy our democracy. But if you can convince an entire party to go along with you, you have a lot better shot at it. And maybe that was actually the design, believe it or not. Sad, but true. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see what to pick up next here. Let's see. I think. Oh yes, right. We were going to make a move over to another Daily Kos piece. I saw this one spotted the other day. I got no segue for you for this one, but I thought I was pretty astonished by it myself. Oh, is this the mobile version of it? Can I get the? I'm asking my invisible, non-existent production staff. Can I get the full site version of it? Yeah, there we are. Okay. Oh, look at that. Now they're up to 1,000 comments plus on that Subir versus Armando story. That should be pretty exciting right about now. I think 900 of them might be from Armando, which is where he is this morning. I didn't see any from him, actually, so far. I don't know whether he would engage in one of those discussions or not. Probably best if he didn't, which means he's probably in there. Immigration official, writes Gabe Ortiz, immigration official tried to convince mom, separated from son, that she crossed border alone. That is, one, an unbelievable headline, and two, that's headline speak. Sometimes reading a headline out loud like that without any of the articles and conjunctions or whatever makes for stilted reading. But that one caught my eye too. Only Gabe actually did something about it and wrote something up nice for Daily Kos. I just read the story in, I don't know where, and said, oh my God, this is outrageous. And it is outrageous. I don't know what else to tell you. So I'm glad that Gabe picked this one up. I don't see how he could have failed to notice this one, but he didn't. So don't worry about it, I guess. Check this story out. Elizabeth and her 12-year-old son Antonio crossed the U.S.-Mexico border together after fleeing violence in El Salvador. Very common story, right? But for weeks after forcibly separating them, immigration officials refused to tell her where the boy had been sent. So far, also a common story, unfortunately, right? At one point, one immigration official even tried to convince Elizabeth that she, quote, had entered the United States alone, without a child at all, unquote. It's astonishing. I don't even know where this comes from. The next stage of the story I might as well get to in this paragraph here. Elizabeth is now among the parents seeking millions in damages from the Trump administration, saying that the family separation policy left their families traumatized. From the moment Antonio was taken away, Elizabeth was consumed with fear and grief, a legal filing states. Immigration officials didn't even allow her to say goodbye. The officers told her that there was no time. I'm sure it was a national emergency, you see, and dragged her away, saying that Antonio was, quote, no longer a child. I guess at 12. They tend to do this with certain brown 12-year-olds, become adults very quickly, whereas youthful indiscretions can last into the 40s when you're a Republican and white. It helps. Anyway, I mean, the gist of this story, and I don't want to shortchange their story by not just continuing with it here, but I was astonished by this. I'd love to know the background, just generally speaking, so that I can decide what sort of retribution really ought to be taken against some of these immigration officials. The gall, I couldn't believe it when I read the story, although I guess it's par for the course with their gaslighting. But trying to convince her that she crossed the border on her own. And the story goes on to then say that this had caused her such stress that they then began to administer drugs, that they basically were telling her, oh, you'll have, I don't know whether they were saying you're having a psychotic episode because you believe you came into the United States with your child. Therefore, take these drugs, and I don't know whether they thought they were hoping or eventually that she would become convinced that that was the case, that she had entered the United States alone and she would stop seeking her son. I mean, it's unimaginably evil if that's what's going on. And made me wonder, was it a mistake of some kind? Did an immigration official who picked up the case midstream not have any records in his file when talking to Elizabeth about her case that there was a child involved, and just assume that there wasn't and that she didn't know what she was talking about? Or was it a conscious decision to try to gaslight her into madness? And if that didn't do it alone, even if you did find the son, I can't return her son to her in this delicate psychotic state, can I? That's, I don't know. It's unbelievable that we would even arrive at this, but I guess there's any number of possible explanations, only a very few of which aren't just inherently evil. And I don't know why I pretend to be surprised about such things still, but I guess it's if you can't pretend to be shocked at this sort of inhumanity, then I guess you don't have much of a grip on your own humanity anymore. And I worry about that possibly happening in the future to a lot of people, myself included. Let me take a look at the rest of this right up here so we can give you more context. Elizabeth spent weeks without any information about her son. She stopped eating and became so distraught that she sometimes wanted to die. Elizabeth was prescribed a drug called Vistaril. I'm maybe not pronouncing that right, but Vistaril for her anxiety, which she took voluntarily at first. When she found it made her disoriented and sleepy, she stopped. And we heard similar stories about them administering drugs to the kids that they had separated away, teenagers, and for the most part, which only made the nightmare worse. As we were reading about this, freely administering all these strange psychoactive pills to people. So she found it made her disoriented and sleepy. She stopped taking it. It was then that officials forced her to take the medication, as many as 2 pills 3 times a day. Other times, officers would berate and verbally threaten her until she took the pills. It would be a month before Elizabeth would get to talk to her son on the phone. Antonio had been sent to a facility in New York where he saw other frightened kids. The other children were also scared and crying, and a person at the facility told Antonio and the other children that they had to call her mom. During the phone conversation, Antonio cried and begged Elizabeth to come get him and take him back to El Salvador. Believe it or not. After only 5 minutes, their call was terminated. The two were separated for nearly 3 months until they were reunited in Florida, where a sponsor had helped Elizabeth get her own apartment. She felt like it had been years since they were apart. Together, she and Antonio cried and cried. Still, the trauma from their forcible separation continues. When Antonio left for his first day of 7th grade, Elizabeth had a panic attack. Antonio has nightmares about his experience and described the months-long separation from his mother as the worst thing that has ever happened. Monday, February 18th, by the way, Gabe notes in closing, is 207 days since a federal judge's reunification deadline, but children stolen from families at the border are still in U.S. custody. Family separation remains a crisis. Absolutely true, but that's a really stunning example of just how far the Trump administration is willing to carry things. I do feel like with further investigation, I'd love to know whether they even try to offer some sort of explanation as to how that happened and how this, in particular, how they came to decide to try to tell her that she had entered the United States on her own and without her son, and to what end. As evil as they are, I still have a hard time believing that anyone would even come up with a plan like that. Seems like such a long shot to work, for one thing. And to what end? Why do you even care? I mean, you've separated them. You've forcibly separated them, and they're both in custody. There really isn't anything to be gained by convincing her. I mean, or if there is, I'd like to know what it is. I mean, I guess, you could say that the administration might have in mind, well, if we keep them separated, that's better. But really, why? Is it because as an unaccompanied minor, he could be bounced out of the United States somehow, and as a refugee without a child with her, she could be deported easier as well? Maybe that's the case. I just don't know enough about immigration law, and this is no time to try to learn either, because there is no law. Of course, now is really the time to actually learn that stuff so that you can point out exactly how many times and in how many instances the law is being violated. So although the people violating the law don't appear to have any shame, occasionally you'll run into a judge who does and will help you out. I shouldn't dismiss the idea of learning the rules, learning the ropes, even in a lawless system. You need to be able to know how far you've gone from sensibility in order to try your best to shame somebody into doing something about trying to bring it back, whether it's an administration official or a judge. It's not always going to be possible, but it's still your best weapon. Know the rules. All right, let's see. Other stories of some interest, some of which I got to or didn't get to over the last couple of days, but really ought to. Another small-scale story in the grand scheme of things, but sometimes a Tuesday is a good day, like Friday, to round those things up. Here's a weird one. Ex-West Virginia official, so that's pretty low on the low rung on the ladder there. An ex-West Virginia official, of what kind? We'll read on. Who made racist Michelle Obama remark, defrauded also, not in so doing has defrauded this money, but has also later defrauded $18,000 from FEMA, according to this report. I have a write-up in it, on the Hill on it here. Aris Foley, Aris, Foley is our author. A former West Virginia official who lost her job in 2016 after she referred to then First Lady Michelle Obama as an, quote, ape, nice, has captured headlines again after she pleaded guilty to defrauding the Federal Emergency Management Agency out of thousands of dollars intended for flood victims. The Charleston Gazette-Mail reports. How do you live this life? I don't know. Well, apparently she lost her job in 2016, rightfully, after making these ridiculous comments. How then was she in a position to embezzle this money? Maybe she must have done it before she got fired for saying what she said about Michelle Obama, and the court system is only now finally convicting her of it. That's the only way I can imagine it happening. According to the local paper, Pamela Taylor, the former director of the Clay County Development Corporation, I guess that's the job she lost in 2016, pleaded guilty earlier this week to taking more than $18,000 in relief benefits from the agency intended to help those whose homes were damaged in the 2016 floods that ravaged regions of the state. Remember, I don't know whether she's Republican or Democrat, and in West Virginia sometimes it's hard to tell, but they always did say that they were just economically anxious, and maybe that's actually true. It's not just that she's a racist; she's also economically anxious. And if she wasn't, she wouldn't have been so busy trying to embezzle money from FEMA. It was her economic anxiety drove her to that, plus also her unfortunate remarks about Michelle Obama. It's never racism, it's economic anxiety. Wow. Taylor, 57, she's packed a lot into her 57 years, wrongfully registered for the benefits and falsely claimed that her home had been damaged by the floods and that she was forced to stay in a rental property, according to the newspaper. Basic straight-up fraud. But I guess, again, in her capacity as Clay County Development Corporation director, came to be aware of the availability of FEMA funds for families in Clay County whose homes were actually damaged. And I guess if you were just a lay person who had the same knowledge, you might be reluctant to file a claim that your home was damaged because you would figure, well, surely they'll check on those things. Somebody if you file the paperwork with the Clay County Development Corporation and they pass it on to FEMA, somebody at the Clay County Development Corporation will probably check, was that home damaged, before passing the paperwork on to FEMA. Now, the reality is that probably not. So those of you who are thinking of embezzling funds from FEMA or any other governmental agency, you should probably know, I mean, I don't know what the odds are that you'll get caught, but the odds that someone will come to the house and check are probably pretty low, but I guess in some cases they must, and I'm glad that that's the case. What's interesting is that when Republicans scream for cutting waste, fraud, and abuse in these programs, they usually mean, I think they often mean, although I'm sure they're upset about having gotten Pamela Taylor, their good racist friend, in trouble, they usually mean that. At least the publicly facing intent here is, we don't want people asking for $18,000 in damage, in relief from flood damage, if their house has not been flood damaged, at least not to the tune of $18,000. That's the waste, fraud, and abuse that we're talking about. What usually ends up getting cut, though, as they look to cut the budgets of these agencies, whether on the state level or county level, for that matter, here in the Clay County Development Corporation or FEMA overall, what usually gets cut is, we need to fire all the people whose job it is to go to these houses and match them with the forms and take a look and say whether it's plausible that they've sustained $18,000 worth of damages or not. Therefore, thereby presumably avoiding as much waste, fraud, and abuse as you can. But if the inspectors are gone, we don't have the personnel, we don't have the time to check these things. Clay County Development Corporation is just going to stamp them all, send them to FEMA. FEMA's going to have no way of checking either, and they're just going to start cutting checks on the presumption that nobody would just report false fraud, or very few people would, because they'll mostly think, I'll get caught, I won't do it. Now, the kind of person that wouldn't be stopped by the worry that they'll get caught might include the people who have reason to know that their claims will automatically be approved by the Clay County Development Corporation. In other words, the director of the Clay County Development Corporation, and probably any of her friends too. They should check that out. Depending on how far and wide she spread the word that FEMA money was now available to Clay County residents. But imagine if you were the person who could you would know automatically, my request will be approved by the county, and FEMA is not really going to have the resources to come and check. They'll just take the county's word for it, and I am the county when it comes to this, so I'll just put in. Now, why 18,000? Why not 20,000? I don't know. Maybe 18,000 was the maximum award available according to some formula. Maybe it was a number she thought they wouldn't question, but 20,000 or 25,000 would raise an eyebrow. I have no idea, but there you have it. 57 years old. That's the kind of life she's lived to date, at least in the last 2 years, calling Michelle Obama an ape and trying to defraud FEMA out of $18,000. So the report further notes that it was later reportedly discovered that Taylor's primary residence was undamaged by the floods and she was still residing there. So no, it wasn't damaged, and no, she wasn't paying for a rental property and in need of reimbursement. Taylor has since reportedly agreed to pay $18,149.04 in restitution in her plea agreement. The former government employee also reportedly faces up to 30 years in prison, in addition to a maximum fine of $500,000. That is pretty stiff. I wonder if the $149.04 is interest. The West Virginia woman first captured national attention after she was removed from her position in November of 2016 when she said in a Facebook post that, quote, "It will be so refreshing to have a classy, beautiful, dignified First Lady back in the White House. I'm tired of seeing a, not an, but a, and then capital A, ape in heels. Seeing a ape in heels. My goodness." The post instantly became a source of outrage among the public, with many demanding public apologies and her termination. And they got it, and as a bonus, it turns out she was a crook as well. Economically anxious, but a crook. So, I don't know. That's a story. It won't affect national news, but just, reminding you how many deplorables there really are out there, and what they're doing, even when they're not being obviously deplorable in Trump-related ways. Actually, she was spending the rest of her time on a very Trump agenda, wasn't she? Falsely claiming federal emergency and disaster recovery funds to which she was not entitled. Donald Trump did that as well. I don't think at the moment that he faces up to 30 years in prison or $500,000 in fines, but maybe he should. But maybe only the Southern District of New York prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office are willing to say that he should face that danger now as a sitting president. All right, let's see. Other bits and pieces of news that we can use to weave together a less than coherent, but also nonetheless interesting show for today. Let's see. This will surprise no one, of course, but I have this tweet here from Andrew Kaczynski from the other day on the one of the CNN programs, I guess with what's the program? State of the Union? Okay. Played a new clip that he found, and that's Kaczynski's job, finding those clips and putting them on CNN, from 2015 of White House Chief of Staff, now Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. Is he acting Chief of Staff? I can't remember whether he's still acting or not. Calling executive action on immigration an, quote, imperial presidency that was, quote, dangerous for everyone. Mulvaney at the time was a congressman, of course, and attempted, this is the interesting part, to defund President Obama's ability to shape immigration policy through executive action. Not just that he's hypocritical on the question of executive action, but he's a hypocrite on the question of the congressional purse strings as well. At the time, as a member of Congress, he sought to defund the president's ability to shape immigration policy by executive action. And as chief of staff to White House chief of staff to Donald Trump, acting or otherwise, he not only encourages the same use of, or even more aggressive use of executive action to shape immigration policy, he also now rejects the principle that Congress can or even should be allowed to have a say over whether or not it's funded, and will defy congressional efforts to defund the executive action that Trump takes. So doubly hypocritical. And I thought, well, even though it will be of no surprise to anyone, worth pointing out and noting that he's doubled down on the hypocrisy there. Interesting. Okay, let's see. Other fun and or interesting stories. Let's see. Well, there's a lot of sort of overall looks at just how crazy Trump actually is. That, I don't know, it feels like they're old news at this point, but some of them might have some very interesting insights. Here we go. Something I can spend the last segment on after our next break. Something I, in fact, meant for last Friday's show and didn't get to. So Tuesday's a good day to deal with some of those. Any other things that might fit in the few minutes we have before the next break? Let's see. Here's one that's speculative, but I thought I'd put aside, since I've read so many stories from Elsewhere and Daily Kos already today. Let me pick this one up. That was post last Friday also from Nonlinear. Nonlinear, if we get sued for this one, it's all on you. How's that? Is the president's liver failing? I don't know. Greg's not here to answer for that, and he's not a liver specialist per se. Maybe he knows a little something about this, but it sounded like, from my quick read of Nonlinear's diary, that maybe Nonlinear had some medical training as well. Let me just share this with you. I had just read the far less than informative letter President Trump's physician, Sean Conley, issued when I watched the president declare a national emergency, as we all did. Well, I didn't watch, but you did. I think there's a national emergency, all right. I believe the president is desperately ill. Not that you would know that from anything his doctor said. According to Conley, the president is in very good health overall. And some tweets about reports from Jim Acosta about that are included here. Fox News would like us to move on. Nothing to see here, but not so fast. What you need to know is, according to the report that Acosta filed, that the president had an increase in the one, I think, and perhaps only medication that was listed on his report here, which I'm going to try and pronounce here, is rosuvastatin. I have no idea. ROSUVA statin, I can make it, STATIN. And that his dosage was being upped to 40 milligrams of this particular drug. And what Nonlinear points out is that what you need to know is that 40 milligrams is the maximum dosage allowed of this medication. I certainly wouldn't have known that offhand. I bet you thought I was going to talk about his weight. Don't worry, I will get there. Rosuvastatin, I hope I'm even close on that one, is a drug that reduces total cholesterol by lowering low-density lipoprotein, right, LDL, and raising levels of high-density lipoprotein, which is protective against heart disease. Most doctors in the U.S. start patients at 10 to 20 milligrams once a day, Conservative doctors and those in Canada and Germany start at 5. Or they go 10 every second day. Okay. That is because there is such a thing as rosuvastatin intolerance. Okay, makes sense, right? Starting at a lower dosage. This is a very useful drug, as it turns out, with some serious but rare side effects. And even after all these years, physiological effects aren't that well understood. Some links here to establish some of that. What the authors are saying is that by some uncertain means, rosuvastatin reduces inflammation and lowers blood pressure. All these good things that they tell you about. But, well, we'll return to the story afterwards, but apparently it's a big deal to be on 40 milligrams a day. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Making a little microphone noise there. Wow, okay. Let's see. Let's continue with Nonlinear's piece here. It's not too much longer, I don't think. Oh, well, it does tend to... Oh, it's a lot of updates. Ooh, I didn't see that. All right, well, the basics are here. The reason it's a big deal, apparently, to be on 40 milligrams of rosuvastatin is that's the maximum allowable dosage, and it apparently has some, like many drugs, liver-related side effects. It does manipulate cholesterol levels, which is the idea of the thing, and it does reduce inflammation, lowers blood pressure. Goes on to say, the diary does. You'll notice that Trump's BP, blood pressure, is listed in the letter as 118/80, which is very low for a man his age, and that may well be a positive side effect of his rosuvastatin prescription. Some of the better-known side effects of rosuvastatin are insomnia, jaundice, interestingly enough, which can, of course, cause your skin to be yellow or yellowish. He's a little more orangey than that, but headaches, stomach pain. Oh, headaches are listed twice, unless it's like, in case you forgot. So, insomnia, jaundice, headaches, stomach pain, forgetfulness, and headaches, I guess. And more seriously, though, diminished liver function and the onset of type 2 diabetes, which I think a lot of people probably had some worries about when it came to President Trump. There is, by the way, little data on side effects of long-term use of 40 milligrams of rosuvastatin, but what we know for sure is that this dosage is contraindicated for patients over 70. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. You seem to know for sure. He is, of course, over 70. So why risk it? What are these doctors seeing in the president's blood work that requires such a huge dosage? And why aren't they sharing that data with the American public? There are only 3 possible reasons for upping the dosage. The first is that the patient's total cholesterol and low-density lipoprotein levels were rising despite his earlier dosage. Rising cholesterol in a 72-year-old obese man on 20 milligrams of rosuvastatin screams ticking time bomb. I can't speak to that characterization, but I'm passing it on. The second reason, and by the way, can we speed up the ticking? But all right. The second reason for such a high dose would be an elevated reading on a high sensitivity C-reactive protein. This test, the HSCRP test, this test just tells the doctor if you have inflammatory responses going on anywhere in your body, but high levels of inflammation are predictive of heart disease, and thus so is HSCRP. Again, ticking time bomb. We do know the drug doesn't work anywhere near as well on patients who won't consume less fat and less calories, get more exercise, and lose weight. I guess the things that doctors would normally tell you. The drug can only do so much. You need to consume less fat, less calories, get more exercise, lose weight, and this drug can also help improve your condition along the way. But, he's not into that. In other words, it's not an optimal choice for President Trump. So again, I ask, Nonlinear says, why is an obese, lazy, 72-year-old man with a multi-hamburger-a-day habit taking a drug not intended to be used in this situation, since its effectiveness will be reduced by his behaviors, and in a dosage that could well be a death sentence, and an ugly death at that? I don't know. That's what it says. And where in this report is the essential liver function test we need to know if this dosage is destroying the president's liver? The third reason you might be on a maximum dose of rosuvastatin is because there is a growing off-label use of rosuvastatin to delay the onset of Alzheimer's. That I didn't know about. I didn't know about any of it, but that was a surprise to me. I think the question has to be asked, does the president have dementia? And if not, why is he on rosuvastatin? Now, ironically, we have to ask if the former dose caused the cognitive issues that we have seen in the president over the last few years, and if those symptoms are going to be worse on the increased dosage. There is certainly research that suggests this could be the case. It is herein linked. There are other questions I'd like answers to, such as why are the president's doctors describing a man who is either racing up on a heart attack, suffering a major inflammatory disease, or in the grips of dementia as healthy? Why are the media not pushing back hard on this absurd medical situation? I'm going to have to add a word here in order to make that sentence make sense. And I think the answer is they don't know. I don't know anything about this. You guys know about this. Now, as to the president's weight, I don't want to fixate on this other than to say there is a body of research that suggests obese people may be more likely to suffer liver damage while on rosuvastatin. This again suggests rosuvastatin is contraindicated for the president. Two final thoughts, although there's lots of updating here. The mental issues the president is suffering in full view of the public are those you would expect during liver failure. Is that right? It's called hepatic encephalopathy. Did I get that right? Encephalopathy I got right, I think. This was particularly evident during today's, that would have been Friday's, announcement. Do you think so? You can check your reading of what happened on Friday against the link provided right here about on healthline.com regarding hepatic encephalopathy. The condition is a very likely outcome of what we know about the president's overall health and the medication he's on. Fox News is wrong. Even the data the president has made public indicates a man in failing health and raises new critical concerns. Today's events just bring the urgency of dealing with the president's health back into focus. And I guess by way of update, we'll share some of this information too. I guess a lot of people had a lot of questions. In my next diary, Nonlinear continues, I'm going to talk about my long 40-plus year career as a scientist. Not doctor, I guess, but scientist, or maybe both, who knows. Most of that has been as a medical scientist doing research on humans. I realized reading the comments that I assumed a degree of knowledge about human physiology that some of you may not possess. That's true. And in the process, missed a chance to include a public service announcement. I would like to redress that here and now. What I am about to say is simply a fact. There are no rhetorical tricks involved. As you age, your body's ability to process drugs changes. There are no hard and fast rules about when these changes begin to occur. And it isn't the same for any two patients, or for that matter, any two drugs. You need to work with your primary care physician and your specialist to make sure that these changes are detected and your medications adjusted appropriately as you age. I always recommend starting with your annual physical at age 60. If you are the caregivers to elderly parents or a professional caregiver, you need to be especially vigilant and ask both the person you're caring for and their physicians questions about verifying appropriate dosages and making necessary changes. Please look out after you and yours. I would offer President Trump and his family the same advice. I guess maybe there were some commenters who say, hey, I take 40 milligrams of rosuvastatin and I'm 72. Am I going to die or what? So I suppose that would maybe reassure you that if you talk to your doctor, he'll tell you better than we can just guessing through a diary. The concern for the president's health continues in the next update. I don't think there's anything else here that does much more by way of informing us about any concerns about the condition of the president's liver, but an interesting thing to watch out for. And I guess if he should drop dead anytime soon of anything related to anything in this diary, you can say, aha, I heard it here first. I knew he was going to drop dead of some manifestation of his ill health. And people will say, what a genius you are. You predicted that. Okay. Now, no segue whatsoever from this to the next topic. Again, something I meant to cover last Friday, didn't get to it. Totally disjointed from everything, but would make a great Friday topic. But if I save it for this Friday, I might forget again. And so, with a sip of water, we move on to this totally unrelated and disjointed piece, which I now, of course, discover is the AMP version. I'm going to try and get the normal version here from the Washington Post just to make sure we can read this thing correctly. All right. Told you, no connection whatsoever to the rest of today's show, but not far afield from things we've discussed in the past or topics, areas we've brought up in the past. Some of this stuff is really fascinating. How do you like this one? Ready? In the business section of the Washington Post, from Jonathan O'Connell and Emma Brown, a February 11th filing. I feel like the credits of a movie at this point. A hedge fund's mercenary strategy. Mercenary in scare quotes there. Buy newspapers, slash jobs, sell the buildings. This is a new twist of some interest to me on the very hot news topic of the death of news and their topics, I guess. But lots of newspapers, both traditional and those that have pivoted to digital, so to speak. But a lot of newspapers and a lot of newsrooms in the country seeing a lot of layoffs, a lot of firings, a lot of dramatic restructuring, and lots of speculation over what that means or how to avoid it or whether it's inevitable for everyone in the digital age or whatever. The introduction of meddlers from hedge funds into this scene begins to make some sense at last of all the layoffs, job losses, firings, etc. That is, the locusts are here, and they're here to find ways to extract as much cash value from the companies they buy as possible. And you're never coming out of bankruptcy. You'll never recover once you've been bought by a hedge fund or whatever guise it comes in. Your venture capitalists are investing in you. A hedge fund has done it. Private equity, it's all the same. It's about removing as much of the value from whatever they've bought and converting into cash as possible and handing it over to the people who put up the money. This is as far as I go in the broad overarching condemnation of capitalism in our larger questions and discussions about socialism and the development of possible socialism movement in the United States. And do we think capitalism has failed? I define capitalism very narrowly, and it makes it easier to see where and whether it has failed. But yes, the basic assumption that the chief interest, and when I say interest, I mean the most heavily weighted interest in any corporation should be those who put up the capital to make it work, as opposed to other stakeholders in the organization, including the people who put up the labor to make it work. Nothing works without a combination of labor and capital, but capitalism is the dedication to the primacy of capital, in my view, dedication to the primacy of capital in that equation, though they are two add-ins without which, the other of which there is no productivity. For whatever reason, capital comes first, and there may have been some excuse for making that assumption in the past, and some of them may even hold true currently. I mean, there's no question but that capital is more flexible than labor in almost every instance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be the favored partner in all of it. That's my chief complaint. Anyway, let me read you what this particular hedge fund is doing and make you mad about that instead. When the building housing the downtown Memphis Commercial Appeal newspaper sold last April, the name of the buyer, 20 Lake Holdings LLC, already I'm getting nervous, seemed of little consequence. The paper would be moving from its longtime home amid declining circulation and a shrinking staff under its owner, Gannett. The old newsroom was little more than an afterthought. There's an awful lot going on in this story, by the way, and I'm sure we won't get through it because I have to pause it every little bit. But moving on. 20 Lake Holdings is not just another commercial real estate investor. It is a subsidiary of Alden Global Capital, the New York City hedge fund that backed the purchase of and dramatic cost cutting at more than 100 newspapers, causing, well, I think they meant costing more than 1,000 lost jobs. There we are, causing more than 1,000 lost jobs. I didn't realize that the word lost was in there. So there's your deal. Alden Global Capital, that's the hedge fund. One subsidiary, 20 Lake Holdings LLC, is the one that bought the Memphis Commercial Appeals building. All right. Alden is the one that has bought more than 100 newspapers, causing more than 1,000 lost jobs. For Alden and its subsidiary, the Gannett Empire's newspapers are clearly an attractive feature. Now, again, here, just to pause and comment on these things. Why are Gannett Empire's newspapers an attractive feature? Newspapers are losing money everywhere. They're laying off staff everywhere. What would make this an attractive feature for a hedge fund? There's a couple of things I could think of. But what's interesting here mostly is that they have concentrated so heavily on buying newspapers and laying off staff, restructuring them, selling their buildings, etc. In other words, essentially looting the places, which can be a profitable business, but there's also something else out there looming as a possibility. A couple different things. Now, so as I was saying, the Gannett Empire's newspapers are clearly an attractive feature, but by purchasing the Memphis building and others like it, Alden has already begun coming for what it may consider a bigger prize, Gannett's real estate. Interesting. I mean, though many towns have dying newspapers, they cover either the city or the region, whatever, and they're all over the country, obviously. The papers themselves are dying, but what do most of these newspapers have left over from their legacy days, whenever they started? You know, their heyday of the 50s and 60s, who knows when they did these things. But the major cities around the country that have their own newspaper, what's a fixture of downtown real estate is, the paper, the paper's building, either whether they occupy the whole thing or just some of it. The printing presses are overwhelmingly out in the fringes and the exurbs now, but the newsroom is there. So there's almost always prime real estate in the downtown area. Sometimes the downtown's not really necessarily the place to be, but there's lots of prime business real estate tied up in these businesses that are otherwise dying. So in other words, this hedge fund that's buying 100 newspapers may have no interest whatsoever in running newspapers. They just know newspapers have great office space in downtown areas that, screw the newspaper, close it and buy and flip the building or the office is in the building. And I'm not interested in the newspaper, in the news aspect of it at all. And what's scarier, I guess, if we might run out of time on this one, but we might as well spit this out. What's worse possibly is, what if not only was this a profitable thing to do, but what if, just bear with, hear me out for just a second. What if people running a hedge fund out of New York City were insanely wealthy people and had a strange affinity, let's say, for the Donald Trump version of capitalism that puts not only primacy on capital, but primacy on people who already have all the capital, and decides that it needs to cut their taxes so that they can do what? Create jobs. Create jobs in the industry of destroying thousands more jobs. In other words, it wouldn't be outrageous to assume that hedge fund types might be big Donald Trump fans, and that it might, in addition to bringing them profits to destroy newspapers, might bring them pleasure to destroy newspapers or political advantage. In other words, what if a hedge fund was willing to take it on the chin and lose money, or only recover part of what it was investing in real estate sales, by destroying the enemy of the people? I don't know that that's what's happening. I'm just saying something other than an interest in running newspapers for profit is what's happening here. That's clear. Now, we'll continue on. The hedge fund's newspaper business, that's not the only thing they invest in, this hedge fund. It's just that everything else they happen to invest in also sucks. But the hedge fund's newspaper business, digital first media, that certainly sounds like someone who's interested in the future of newspaper business, right? Digital first media. That's a forward looking, right? Well, this digital first media is bidding to buy Gannett, operator of the nation's largest chain of daily newspapers by circulation, including USA Today, as well as its $900 million in remaining property and equipment. It wants to buy all of this for $1.3 billion. The tactics employed by Alden, the hedge fund umbrella company, and Digital First Media are well chronicled. They buy newspapers already in financial distress. Those are the easiest ones to buy, including big city dailies such as the San Jose Mercury News and the Denver Post. Reap the cash flow and lay off editors, reporters, photographers to boost profits. That's standard operating procedure for hedge funds and all the people who operate in that portion of finance. Venture capital, people who are claiming to try to build startups, are also about reaping cash flow and laying off people. Private equity, same thing. I mean, essentially, I don't even know how to even draw the line between hedge fund and private equity these days. It just has to do with their structure, and so what they do is the same. How they do it and how they pay out the profits is slightly different, I guess. Maybe not even all that different, but and that dovetails nicely with what we've told you for a long time on the show, and lots of other people have corroborated along the way. Capital's not about creating jobs. It's about making sure that there are fewer jobs. Essentially, jobs are a cost center. The more people you have on payroll, the less money you get to keep for yourself. Increasing the supply of capital, whether by cutting the taxes of aggressive capitalists or whatever, or simply awarding them primacy in every dispute, doesn't create jobs. It only creates the opportunity to destroy more later on. All right. So here's what they're doing. They're buying up troubled newspapers and firing everybody and trying to reap the cash flow, whatever happens to be there. But, a lot of these papers don't have great cash flow. So they have to look elsewhere or to other portions of the business. In a 2018 court case, the article continues, Alden disclosed it has a series of affiliated real estate companies whose business is focused primarily on efficiently buying, selling, leasing, and redeveloping newspapers, offices, and printing plants. Sounds like a pretty good vertical integration, right? 2 years after Alden established Digital First, it created 20 Lake Holdings, remember them? Which began taking ownership of some of the paper's facilities, according to public records. On its website, 20 Lake Holdings says it, quote, utilizes centralized brokerage, asset management, lease administration, legal, project management, and architectural services to efficiently manage, transact, maximize value, and minimize expense. There's about 17 different tenses being used in that sentence, it seems, or forms anyway. It claimed to have acquired more than 180 properties and 2.3 million square feet of real estate in 29 states. A review of property records by the Washington Post found dozens of newspaper buildings 20 Lake Holdings or 20 Lake Management had bought or sold. All newspaper buildings. A 20 Lake subsidiary, a subsidiary of a subsidiary, in other words, Praxis Commercial, acts as a broker for selling and leasing properties, more vertical integration. According to properties it lists online and marketing flyers placed with listing services including CoStar. I don't know what that is, but I guess it's an industry standard of some sort. After the Post sent inquiries to the company's executives, the website for 20 Lake Holdings was replaced with a page saying, our website is under construction. That seems odd. Company president Joseph E. Miller declined to comment. Alden executives did not respond to requests for comment. In response to questions sent to Alden and Digital First, also known as MNG Enterprises, spokeswoman Renee Soto declined to offer any examples of the company investing anew in its media properties. A venture capitalist might say that's what we're doing, but a hedge fund says no. Soto issued an email statement. MNG is committed to the newspaper business and a long-term investor in the space. MNG's focus is on getting publications to a place where they can operate profitably and sustainably and continue to serve their communities. A Gannett spokesman also declined to comment for this story. And of course, they're really not about that. They're just about saying that they're about that. They're about looting the place and taking it apart and selling off the building. Other media companies have focused in recent years on selling underused real estate to raise cash. Gannett, for example, has sold more than $150 million worth of properties to help stabilize its finances since 2015, according to commercial real estate data and news reports. But experts said Alden has moved more aggressively to make more money off of its real estate than competing media companies. For Alden, the commercial appeals building may not have been an afterthought, but its main target. I think real estate is the first thing they look at, said Doug Arthur, an analyst at Huber Research, who said he met with Alden's founder, Randall D. Smith, around 2013, after he said Alden principals expressed an under-the-radar interest in Gannett, in which they proposed spinning off all the company's real estate into a separate firm. Analysts say such a move would have yanked a potential lifeline the company's media properties could turn to for cash in hard times. Last week, Gannett's board voted to reject the offer, questioning Digital First's ability to finance the deal. Digital First fired back, nominating 6 people for Gannett's board. Gannett said it will consider whether the nominees are committed to acting in the best interest of all Gannett's shareholders or are beholden to Digital First. Now, while Gannett is resistant to Alden's hostile bid for the company's newspapers, Gannett has already sold at least 6 of its buildings, at least 5 of them within the past year, to 20 Lake Holdings, or an affiliate, according to property records. In some instances, 20 Lake has already extracted higher prices for Gannett's real estate than Gannett did. In other words, they're flipping the real estate that they can't take. If they can't take the newspaper company over, they're offering the newspaper company financial relief by buying their assets and then flipping them anyway, which is, that's legit. You can do that. It's just kind of interesting to see. Now, what we won't get to in this, and maybe we should just hang on to the rest of this and continue with the reading of it later, because it actually does deserve some attention. They have a very interesting strategy once they've acquired. If they don't acquire the property alone or the property first, but instead actually acquire the company and then spin off the real estate because they own the company, and you can do whatever you want once you own the company because capital is prime in capitalism. And the people who own, people who put up the cash, get to decide what happens to the building, not the people who work there. But there's a very interesting additional way of siphoning off profits, siphoning off cash that they've come up with, which is interesting in its own right and in a completely different context. The evolving relationship of working Americans with their employers and their employment environment, let's say, without giving away too much. They've found yet another way to make people double up on the work that they do and the investments that they make, non-cash investments, in the places that employ them, making them stakeholders but not shareholders because capitalism. Please, you're not a shareholder just because you work here and make sacrifices that take money directly out of your pocket. We'll get to what that is perhaps later on in the week. I'll just leave things hanging, unless, of course, you read the article yourself between now and then, which you're entitled to do. And, or in case Justice Putnam covers the story, what do I know what's coming next? Well, actually, I have a long list about what's coming next. Do stay tuned, though, for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy and find out what those things are, probably on your own.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
You don't have to do it all on your own. I'll tell you a little bit about it. Let me give you this story. This one, I love this one. I'm glad he picked this one up. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton still faces felony criminal charges for securities violations, but his newly elected state senator wife wants to give his office more power over the securities industry. Vertical integration. It's a great thing.